Okay. Good evening. I'd like to call to order the March 9th New Canaan Board of Education meeting. First up is to approve the minutes from the February 3rd meeting. Is there a motion? Brendan, second? Anyone?
Somebody?
Deanna? Oh, yeah, everybody was here. All in favor? Approved? Okay. Next.
Actually, I abstained because I wasn't here, sorry.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Next is to approve the minutes from the March 2nd executive session. Is there a motion? Brendan, second?
What? Why is it saying I'm not here then?
Oh, all right.
Oh, that's January 26th. I was here February, well, whatever, never mind. I wasn't.
Yep, the last two pages are March 2nd in your agenda.
Comes after during executive session, reconvene and adjournment. There's no motion.
Motion for,
There was a motion that we voted on,
That's right.
so it's not in here.
Let me take it to close. Approve the agenda, announcements, adjourn, reconvene, and then adjournment. That's right. So
Okay.
I would table the motion
Yep, okay.
to
We'll table.
approve, and we will revise them, get them back out.
okay, thank you, Bob. Motion's tabled. We'll review that for the next meeting. Okay, for tonight's agenda, I'd like to propose an addition to the agenda. I'd like to propose that we, first, under reports and recognition, have an update from Dr. Lutzy on the COVID-19 or the coronavirus actions in our schools. Is there a motion for that update? Penny, second? Sherry, all in favor? Okay. Now to review and approve the agenda with the addition. Is there a motion? Brendan, second. Penny, all in favor? Okay. Comments from the public. To ensure the public's right to be heard, the board has set aside time during the meeting for public comments. 2 minutes will be allotted to each speaker and a maximum of 15 minutes to each subject. Is there anyone wishing to address the board this evening?
Okay, Jennifer DeLippe, 70 White Oakshade Lane. Thank you for keeping this time tonight. As I know, school, you've had a huge effort landing on your plate in the past several days, and I've been very impressed by the level of the communication from administration and teachers, so thank you for all that. I was going to hold my comments and sit back and be hugely optimistic, but thought it might be best to share my thoughts in case there's much discussion to be had amongst the board this evening with the updates from the consultants, and I admit I read ahead, so I think there will be, and I'm less optimistic. By now, we're all familiar with the myriad of sleep research in total across all ages that they say children need a lot of sleep. And with that, there's such a thing as too early and too late in the day. Our discussions very much centers around too early for elementary, which would remove the notion that just because some children might be up earlier, they are ready for the day. It is clear we could be opening a Pandora's box of behavioral issues that I don't think any of us want to wait and see what happens to try and then undo something that cannot be undone. And even in this deck right here, we have lots of sightings of the high school and middle schoolers, but we've supplied to the board much of the research around elementary, and it's not noted, so that's disappointing. For this, I sincerely hope that tonight we hear that all children can start between 8 and 9. I don't think we will. And this includes our 5th and 6th graders who seem to be left out of the group in this discussion as whole. And Jack, by the way, sends the please. He would like to not anything change in 5th grade. The few children that maybe, and it also should be noted that we now have a strong pulse on what the rest of the community, mainly parents, but also the community, think about early start times. It takes a village to raise our children. The few children that may be out really, truly before true dawn, not a security risk I think we should take. I've been criticized for putting too much on this, but every one of those child's lives count, and need to stress this belief is from a wide set of parents. Lastly, as we shared in the town meeting last Friday, I support spending. Many don't support spending unwisely. You have a bigger budget problem from what I can tell next year. Let's be safe, smart, and only spend if we can get this right.
It's time.
Thank you. And I believe this is the sentiment across many of the board as well.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm back. I guess over the past month and a half, I've been sending, members of the Board of Ed, as well as the Town Council, information and research. I've sent you research on the potential effects of early start times on elementary school kids, both behavioral and performance related. I've sent you precedent from the presentations from the Westport and the Norwalk later start time efforts. I've also sent you, I guess, some feedback from the town on the 500 or so plus votes in the community that say that they're opposed to starting elementary schools this early. Now, don't get that confused with, and I think that's one of the problems, everybody's on one side or the other. Most of us are in favor of getting high school kids more sleep. Our kids will hopefully be high school kids as well, but not solely at the expense of elementary school kids. So I've sent that, but today I also sent something else, and that's a table of actual sunrise times over the past 4 months. Now, that indicates there are at least 30 or so days, school days, where the sunrise time is after 7:06, the first pickup time. Now, I've seen this presentation. It appears that the first pickup time is now earlier than 7:06. So I'm assuming there's probably going to be 35, 40 days during the year where sunrise is not before the kids get picked up, the first kid gets picked up. So I just want to kind of point that out. And I think some people have come with this definition of, well, it's civil twilight. Civil twilight is a scientific term for when the sun is 6 degrees over the horizon. It assumes completely clear skies, and obviously that's not the case in Connecticut. I invite you to look. I gave you the website link as well, New Canaan. Look it up, New Canaan, sunset, sunrise times, and you'll find the same table that I provided you. I've highlighted those days. They're actually dark.
It's time.
All right. So I just want to mention that I've provided you the information, so I'm hoping you'll consider it at least, but at least I'll go on record as saying I've provided it to you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, so it's almost like I knew what James was going to talk about, but I didn't. I don't have a lot of handouts that you could just.
Yeah, you can leave right at the table
Okay.
first, that's okay.
Thank you.
All right. So, rhetorical question, who knows when sunrise was today? 7:14. Anybody who was up before 7:14 knows it was light out before 7:14. I was up at 6:30, and I was out by my mailbox, where my daughter gets picked up by the bus, every 5 minutes starting at 6:39. I know I can't give you the handouts, but clearly, clearly by 6:59, 15 minutes before sunrise, it was light out. Civil twilight is not an imaginary thing to make it look like less kids are going to wait in the dark. It's a real thing. 22 states, including Connecticut, allow you to turn off your headlights 30 minutes before sunrise. Now, I think that's a stretch, because my pictures show 30 minutes before sunrise, it's still a little dark, maybe 15, 20 minutes. But putting everything on the actual sunrise time flies in the face of science, and it flies in the face of actual physical observations. Today was sort of a cool day, because with the time change, I didn't have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to do this. And based on that 15-minute definition of it's dark 15 minutes before, it's light 15 minutes before sunrise, there will be 4 days, 4 school days of darkness at 7:06 for 7:06 pickups. And if the pickup is 7:01, there'll be 18 days of, quote, darkness. But I would argue if you push that back even 5 minutes to 20 minutes, which it's still pretty light out, it's 4 or 0. I'd have to check my laptop. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, moving on. Reports and recognition. First up is an update on COVID-19 with Dr. Letzi.
Good evening. Thanks for adding this to the agenda so I can give a relatively brief update. and certainly open to questions from the board, what have you. Today I spent, just prior to this meeting, spent about 75 minutes on a call with the governor, the commissioner of education, the heads of the various state departments, Department of Public Health, Emergency Management, and others. It was a call that was available for superintendents across the state, for selectmen and emergency responders throughout, including each local Department of Public Health director. So I was on, I know our first selectman, Kevin Moynihan was on, Jen Iman was on, our local health director, and some others here in New Canaan. At the state level, they've established an emergency operations center. It's part-time right now, it's ready to go full-time, and they're under what they call the incident command structure, which helps to coordinate statewide communications, where there's a hierarchy of communications that flows through. One of the first things that Governor Lamont shared with us is that a primary lesson from the other states that have begun experiencing this a week or two prior to Connecticut is that nobody has said that they've been over-prepared. Everybody wishes they had done more sooner in order to prepare for what they're experiencing now. That, I think, resonated for me, of course, because we've been taking significant steps to prepare, and I'll talk about those in a moment. The states around us have significantly more cases. New York continues to increase, as you know, New Jersey, Rhode Island today declared a state of emergency, and Massachusetts also has an outbreak that's due to a business conference that was there recently. Additionally, Sacred Heart took the step today to bring all of its classes online until March 30th. And you may have seen that Scarsdale Public Schools is closed at this point until March 18th, pending further review due to a case in their school community. Based on this information, Connecticut continues to be significantly lower than our surrounding states in our identified cases, but the folks on the call shared they believe it's just a matter of time. We'll hold on as long as we can. But they focused to share that the containment period, trying to contain this or keep it out, they're working under the assumption that that's over. And now the focus is really to work on community spread and using non-pharmaceutical interventions, NPIs, in order to try to contain that community spread as much as possible. It's changing hour by hour, as you know, the situation. And so we're trying to be as nimble as we can in our decision making. And there's some things I learned just on the call that we'll have to make some decisions about in the upcoming day. What they do know is it is highly contagious. Of those that have contracted the virus in the area in the United States, what they're finding is about 80%, according to the governor, are self-recovering at home, but the others may need more care, including hospitalization. Those most at risk are those over 60 and those with pre-existing medical conditions, which is consistent with what we've been hearing. The state has issued guidance about gatherings over 100 people. And they talk about these gatherings where people are in close proximity to one another, shoulder to shoulder, at events, in auditoriums, and those things. And they're asking us to identify and to cancel or postpone those types of events wherever feasible. Again, going to the NPI around containing community spread. So far here in Connecticut, they've tested 56 patients, and 2 have tested positive for COVID-19. They've opened a 211 line here in the state for questions. So specifically using that line for if you have questions, if you're thinking you have an experience you'd like to share and get feedback or advice about for your decision making, that's what it's for. Of course, 911 is for medical emergencies that occur. They've taken the step to postpone all conferences in Connecticut where they anticipate 100 or more people. Disappointing news for us. I've spent the year helping to plan the innovation conference for superintendents and assistant superintendents that was scheduled to occur on Friday at Sacred Heart, and so we'll have to cancel that one as well. One of the questions that we've been working through is the guidance around the 180 days. As you know, Connecticut state law requires us to be in school, in session for a minimum of 180 days each school year. Today, the Department of Ed gave some guidance for districts to follow. The guidance, in my estimation, is vague and non-committal and really not appropriate or not helpful enough for districts that need to work through the issues that we're working through. They're anticipating that, similar to H1N1 spread back 10 years ago or so, that the spread will begin in southwestern Connecticut and move its way up and through, coming through New Jersey, into New York, working its way into Connecticut through our region, and then going up. So guidance that's issued from the state in advance, in my opinion, estimation, needs to be strong, clear, and show leadership. So I've written a letter that the Southern Fairfield County Superintendents Association members have signed on with, and I'll be sending that up to Commissioner and the Governor tomorrow, really asking them to follow the guidance and leadership, take the steps similar to what New Jersey has done. And I'll just share with you what our goal is. What New Jersey has done is issue guidance that states any day in which students impacted by a public health-related closure, meaning it's directed by the Department of Public Health in writing, have access, students impacted by a public health-related closure have access to home instruction services provided consistent with the guidance in the memo, which is here, will count as a day in which the Board of Education has provided public school facilities towards its compliance with the 180-day requirement in accordance with state law. So essentially what they're saying is in New Jersey, if the Department of Public Health directs the closure, which is the agency that can do that, superintendents, districts don't make that decision on their own. It works through the Department of Public Health. If that were to occur, then the districts that are set up and ready to deliver home instruction and can prove a continuity of the educational experience for students, and that we've met student needs for students in receiving services and other things, those days will count as part of the 180 days. I believe that here in Connecticut, our commissioner, our governor should take the same steps, and my colleagues throughout Southern Fairfield County and Southwest Connecticut feel the same way. So we're going to be sending that up tomorrow, and I'll be sharing a copy of that with the board as well. The guidance from the call, again, is about the cancellation or postponement of attendance at events with a crowd over 100 people. So there could be some creativity in that. You may be seeing or hearing about the NBA having games with nobody in the crowd, in the stands, right? Our students have worked so hard to do things like prepare for the plays that are going to be on, to our hockey teams, our basketball teams, or others have really prepared so hard. So we're going to be working to try to find creative ways to ensure that the students can have the experience as close to what the typical experience is. And what our wonderful NCTV crew and others may be able to help us with that. And maybe we can stream things live and figure out ways to have access to see what's happening and really let our students have the experience that they've worked so hard to and deserve. So that's just brand new as of about 55 minutes ago. So I'll be working with Jay, I'll be working with our principals and everybody else to sort of problem solve around that and come up with solutions. I do want to share that I'm very happy to share that I've been working very, very well and closely with all of the town agencies. Our local public health director has really been very plugged in at the state level, the national level, the local level, and is very, very forthcoming with sharing all the information that she has. Any questions that come up, I text her, I call her, she gets right back to me, we talk it through, and she's really been incredibly helpful. Kevin, again, has been texting, checking in, keeping up to date with things. So, and Mike Handler, of course, as our Director of Emergency Operations, has been plugged in with all of this right along the way. So that we've got a great team here in New Canaan that we continue to talk together, work together, and problem solve. This is obviously a very unique situation for us as we're working through. The closures around us, I think, are really, again, indicative of what we need to prepare for. What's going on in New Jersey and New York is moving its way up. And again, Rhode Island with the state of emergency. Governor Lamont is not prepared to call a state of emergency here in Connecticut at this point. And they're not prepared to issue a directive about events over 100 people. It's guidance, it's not a directive at this point. The CIAC will be working with our athletic directors around the events that we're having. I'm optimistic, cautiously, but optimistic that we'll be able to figure out a way for the events to go forward for the kids, even if, again, it means we have to do something differently with our spectators. So we're going to work really hard to try to make that happen for them. Again, the focus on community spread, I think it's important to note that, the population we're talking about that really is most vulnerable in this situation, they're not the kids that are walking in our schools, right? They're the folks that are 60 or older, folks that are in assisted living at Waveney Care, at the Inn, and other places around town, and other things. However, when you're dealing with something that's spreading through the community, and anyone that's in that community can be in contact with that, right? So, for instance, we've got children who go home and see their grandparents. We've got people who go visit each other. We've got, social interactions that occur all over town, as all, societies and towns and people do. So the goal in managing and trying to contain the community spread is to keep all of our citizens safe, right? All across the board, from 0 to 100 and everybody in between. So there are more vulnerable populations with us, and that's the biggest concern. But anybody certainly is susceptible to catching this. And again, the rates they're talking about, as the identification rates go up, they anticipate that the mortality rate would go down, to find out what the percentages are and all of that. And that's all important and good. But the non-pharmaceutical interventions that we're talking about taking here are really, well, they're designed to protect against or to try to control that community spread, and they're proven, as we go. So I think it is important to learn the lessons from the states that are a couple of weeks ahead of us, and to pay very close attention to everything going on around us. So here locally, as you know, last week we sent an email out to the community sharing with them that we've been working with our teachers and our staff for the last week and a half or so to prepare the materials, prepare a platform for communications and a strategy in the event of a long duration closure to provide for that continuity of educational experience for our kids. Today, we took the step of having a 2-hour delay in all of our schools in order to give the teachers, staff, TAs, secretaries, custodians, everybody an opportunity to come together, briefly talk about what's going on, and then develop a plan to support one another and get all hands on deck to get materials ready for kids to either bring home and hold at home or to keep in their backpacks and bring back and forth. The thing there, and what's important about that is if something were to occur that led to a school closure, it's immediate. For instance, the Scarsdale closure that happened today, or was announced, I believe, yesterday, didn't provide an opportunity for kids or teachers or others to come into the school to get the materials that they would need. So we're really working to try to set things up. Again, it's only in the event of. There's nothing that's telling us right now that we should close. But we're watching the environment. We're taking the advice of others that we've seen do this. I was affirmed through the comment today about no state that's kind of a little bit ahead of us thinks they're over-prepared. Everybody wishes they had done more. And the more we prepare, the less disruptive, hopefully, it'll be for our students in the eventuality something like this occurs. So today, our teachers, our TAs, everybody's working together to get those materials together. The students should have gone home with them today at the end of the day. I heard a story walking in about a science binder that was at least 4 inches thick and enough material probably for 1.5 years of science lessons. We are overachievers, so we take this seriously. We work our way through it. But to be prepared is to, forearmed. And so we've worked to help our students understand that this is, we're being proactive. We want to keep everybody calm. I heard another story today about, the benefits of an Apple Watch, and there's a lot of things it doesn't do very well, but one thing it does very well is remind us to breathe from time to time. And so that's a good reminder for us as we work through all of this. It's uncharted territory, but we've got the right team, the right people, the right strategy, and I'm confident that we have to do that. Again, the lessons that we're learning, there are some schools that have gone to a longer duration closure out in the Midwest for other reasons, and a few of them used e-learning strategies. And so they were interviewed in articles in Ed Week and others, and really to a person they all said, it only worked because we tested it, piloted it, and prepared for it before there was a problem. We had our kids log in, we had them test it, we gave them materials. We all knew that if we had to do this, it was going to work. We didn't know if we were going to have to do it, but we had that preparation in mind. So we're learning from that. We're also learning from what's happening in China, what's happening in Singapore and other places where, the feedback is those kids that are provided schedules and routines in their days are find it much easier to manage the transition. So our principals have been working with our staff and others to develop schedules that would be communicated out and would help our families and kids to get onto a routine to keep some normalcy in their lives. So as we go forward, we're going to continue to refine our plans as new information comes. The news is, it's never ends, right? It continually sort of comes through. I've committed with my fellow superintendents, again in the region, that if a school does go to closure like this, that we would tell each other directly. Because the other thing, the other challenge with this is the rumors that get out there. For instance, although I thought the letter was very clear, underlined, bolded, the message on the phone was very clear, we did all that we could to really help people understand that this was a proactive step. There were lots of folks who were calling, and some news media and others that were coming through and trying to, interview and ask the question about how long are you closing for, and it's, we're not. At this point, we're not. It's just the preparation. We knew that was a risk when we did it, but we feel the benefits far outweigh that risk. So again, there's nothing that tells us today that we should be closed, other than looking around at other districts, other places, at New Jersey, New York, and others, and being prepared in the context that we're in. So again, glad to answer any questions. Just a brief update, a quick update on where we are, believe it or not, and we'll continue to communicate with the community regularly.
Great. Thank you, and thank you for your leadership on this. It's, I know a tremendous amount of time and effort has been put into place over the recent weeks by the administration and our building principals and all the staff and faculty, so we're very appreciative. And I just wanted to add that. Any questions? Penny?
So I actually haven't been on our website. Is there a page like we have with the start time issue for the COVID? With that, any
Yep.
parent, any
So-
community member or parent can go to get the latest?
Yep, what we're working to do, and you'll notice in the communication that we send out, there are a lot of links to the CDC so that we use the authoritative sources, right? We don't want to be trying to update a website with our information that we're just moving through from the CDC. But we do have all of the letters that have gone out that have those links, and then some links that'll bring people to the Connecticut Department of Public Health and the CDC. If that's not live tonight, it will be tomorrow.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Thank you for everything you're doing.
Jen?
I just want to echo also what Katrina said. You guys have done such an amazing job with this. You have so much going on, and then having this on top of it. So thank you so much. And I've had many parents come to me saying they're so impressed by the communication and the leadership on this. So thank you so much. So this may not be a question you can answer, but I have had a lot of people ask me this question, and I can't really answer it. And I don't know if you can, but in the other states, like, what is the typical closing? So is it like, and again, you probably don't know, but if it did happen, is it 2 weeks set, or is it like, is something set, or is it 2 weeks, 4,
So we're not far enough into it to know.
Got
to be
it.
honest.
Yeah.
For those that have closed, they're still in somewhere, the initial, in my conversations with our health director, and this is just initial conversation and thinking, that if we did have to go to close, it's likely to be 14 days. 14 days is chosen because that is the incubation period for other COVID viruses, other coronaviruses. But they're really not sure about the lifespan of this one. But they would use that as a guide to begin. Question becomes then on day 12, if there's another positive or other things, what would happen? Again, we've gone from keeping it out to managing it and reducing community spread. And that's a little different as well, right? So what are the best ways to reduce community spread? And it may be some of these MPIs over a long period of time. So events with more than 100 people and managing ways that it could be communicated. We're moving to outdoor sports. Outdoor sports on a field are very different than indoor sports on a mat or other things. So, there's maybe some opportunity to continue, again, keep some normalcy there. So it's all very fluid and moving, but if I had to wager a bet, if we did have to go to close, my bet would be that our initial close would be 14 days. But again, that's not until it happens, it hasn't happened.
Thank you.
Sherry?
Okay, I have to also echo, I've never been more thankful for your thoughtful and steady leadership. I mean, in addition to the COVID-19 preparation, you're working through the start times and the budget. I think it can't be said enough how fortunate we are as a district to have you at the helm leading us through this. So from the bottom of my heart, I just want to say thank you for that. My question is, I think we know that this unknown situation is very anxiety-provoking for many children. Can you just speak to any efforts the counselors are having with touching base and making sure we're identifying any children who may be having, severe reactions to the uncertainty? I know a lot of kids came home today saying, oh, we're not going back to school tomorrow. I mean, so even though you're crystal clear in the communication, what then filters out may be heard differently. So if you can just speak to that aspect.
Well, first, it's can't do much to combat the students' wishful thinking. No, just kidding. With our counselors, they have been, they used this morning, for instance, to meet together to create lists of students who they feel do need some extra support and they'd want to check in not only now, but and again, if we do go into a long duration close, who are those students to, make those calls to? Who are those ones? And they're talking about, were they allowed to use FaceTime? Are they allowed to Skype with kids? And, the answer is yes and yes and yes. If we do go into this, we want to keep those personal connections with kids. Bill, Darlene, Jill, and I went over to the buildings this morning for the brief 10-minute faculty meetings as they got things started. And, to a person, our principals and everyone are talking about maintaining those connections with kids because we know it's those interpersonal connections that are so important, valuable, and rich. So our counselors have been strategizing around that, how best to keep the kids connected, making the calls, working with our teachers. We're encouraging, if this were to happen, our teachers to make those direct outreaches to students. I've heard and received some wonderful letters from community members to share that some of the ways that teachers are helping students to understand this in developmentally appropriate ways. Kindergarten parents sent me a cute note that was so grateful about the way that their teachers teaching their children that, your hand to your face, trying not to touch your face. And she used the image of sort of the germ is on the ground floor and your face is the elevator and don't bring it up to, it wants to get there and don't let it happen. And, sort of helping them to understand and put it all in the context. Those lessons are good, not just now, but good all the time for influenza and other things. So everyone is truly engaged in sort of helping our students to understand this in the right ways and to process it. And certainly when kids see adults doing the things that we've been doing to prepare, it can make them nervous and they can think something big is about to happen. So trying to work through that and de-escalate that has been a focus of all of our staff, really K-12. And also, again, for our principals and others, they're working with our staff because our staff are nervous as well, as they are just about anywhere. Mm-hmm. When you hear stories about, Amazon asking everyone, thousands of people to work from home and Facebook and Apple, sending people to work, tens of thousands of people being asked to work from home, it makes you nervous. It's anxiety producing. So, we're all working together to keep to the facts, try to keep to the issues that we know, what do we know about all this, and again, support our kids and our families. Yeah.
Any other questions? Penny?
It's going to put, I don't know how much of a strain, but certainly we're going to depend upon our technological backbone for this. And is it robust enough to handle it? What is your analysis at this point?
Sure. So at each level, our teachers have worked and our curriculum coordinators have worked and our department leaders have worked to identify what's the right platform to use. And most of the all the platforms are cloud-based, whether it's Schoology or Google Classroom or other Google Suite tools. Digication is another one. So those are cloud-based, and our teachers do have the equipment they have. That's something we had to make sure of by the end of last week. We couldn't confidently say we're ready on the instructional side until we knew every teacher had the equipment required to do that. What we're doing now is identifying any families that may be in need of additional resources, primarily technology, but other things too. There can be other things that families may need. Our school social workers, psychologists, principals, our teachers are working together to identify who those folks may be, and then we're reaching out to them to say, hey, is it true that you may need something confidentially? And if they do, if we wind up going to a long duration closure, I would work with our health director locally to figure out, do we use our white vans and transport the equipment to the homes? Do we spend a day driving around and bringing them whatever they need in order to get them up and running? Things like that are all possibilities. So we're figuring out the best way to distribute the resources to families, but we're confident that in the event it happens, we'll be able to solve that problem too. So short answer is yes. Robust enough and ready. Longer answer is there's been an awful lot of work to get there.
Well, thank you for all that work to the entire district that's been doing it.
Great. Bob?
2 questions. Is the guidance on 100 on indoor events or all events?
All events. Anywhere that folks would be shoulder to shoulder. So if you had an event in a stadium where folks were sitting on bleachers, if they're shoulder to shoulder to watch, then it's similar.
And then what triggers the closure? Is it you or a directive from the state
It's the director of public health, local.
locally?
Yep. And then, well, that's through state, so that it would be me with her, with Jen, in communication with the state, who's in communication with the CDC. The superintendents, school districts, boards of ed, generally are not authorized to close for this reason. So it would really, the directive would come externally from them.
And what would it take for them to, do we know?
I have a sense. I don't know exactly, but it is about, again, managing that community spread. So if there's instances in the community that have a direct connection to school, then certainly it was likely.
Okay.
Thank you for that update. Would you like to introduce?
Rob,
Yeah.
sure. I'd love
Okay,
to.
so next up is our report from the transportation consultant.
Absolutely. Rob Jacobus. Rob, come on up. I will give a brief intro. That's all right. And we'll turn it off and then do another Q&A as well. I say this often, right? As a superintendent, you learn to wear many, many hats and shift gears, just like as a principal in any one of our buildings. So now we're going to shift from COVID-19 to transportation. So here we go. Rob, thank you for coming out to join us today. Rob comes out from Colorado, and he'll get a little more specific about that in a moment. As you'll recall, we've continued to look at and refine and work through various scenarios of transportation and what have you, again, with that goal of trying to create a system that's advantageous for all of our kids and develop the best system possible, K-12 across the board. So we had gotten to where we were back in January with the budget and the presentation and the conversation. And then a question came up about, can we bring somebody in to take a fresh look to sort of review the work that we've done to see if there's some opportunity or ideas or other things that could be in there. We'd searched a little bit, and actually a board member had shared Rob's website, which is very well designed and put together. We reached out to Rob, had a conversation, and were impressed by the experiences that he's had in the districts he's worked with, and thought that he'd be a good partner for us to do that review, take a look, see what opportunities could be there, and bring that information forward for us tonight. So with that very brief introduction, Rob, if you want to take it from there, it's all
Sure.
yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Good evening. My name is Rob Jacobus. I'm the president and CEO of School Bus Logistics out of Denver, Colorado. We have offices in upstate New York, Illinois, Dallas, Texas, and in Colorado. We are a consulting firm that does 100% routing and routing operations. We work with school districts and school bus companies. And we work with hundreds of school districts with their routing issues, efficiency studies, bell time changes being one of them. And boy, it's really been keeping us busy, especially California, with the new bill that got passed there. But yes, I want to take an opportunity to kind of go through some of the findings that we found here. The objectives of the project were to move the high school, middle schools to a later start time of the 8:30 bell time, and also adjust the elementary school bells closer to an 8 o'clock start. Knowing that we didn't have any previous knowledge of what the district has done beforehand, we kind of got the current routes and basically started from scratch to take a look at the parameters that were provided by the district. We wanted to also review the earliest pickup time for the elementary schools to see what those times would be. And also, we always want to make sure in transportation that we always want to focus on safety and the safety of children on school buses. So that's why you'll see throughout some of the slides that we post little safety messages for our community and making sure that we're always paying attention to the safety of the children, boarding school buses, being on school buses, and getting them to school safely and on time. The scenarios were evaluated. We wanted to look at how much time was needed between the school bells to best utilize the school bus. Currently, the district is using a 3-tier system. And we'll get into that a little bit, what that looks like, what that sounds like. And I know that you guys have been looking and talking about bell times for a while now, so some of this should be pretty familiar. We also wanted to look at what the earliest times at the bus stops are for the elementary school students as well. Some recent projects that we're currently working on, are Jeffco schools in Golden, Colorado, 85,000 students. We went to the school board, to the study session, and presented a bell time scenario for them, and they've asked us to go back to the drawing board and look at other options. One of them being a 7:45 a.m. start for some of the elementary schools, but at a zero-cost option. What are the options so that it doesn't increase transportation budgets? Another one is that we've done a couple years ago is Cherry Creek schools. They actually moved high school to a later school start time, and then they moved elementary school students to an earlier start time. One we're talking with right now and working with is Boulder, Colorado, same thing. We actually had a committee put together, and they actually decided as a group of principals and teachers that a 7:40 school start time would be actually okay. And then there's a list of other school districts out west in California, Colorado, and some that we've done here locally in the New England area. Current bell structure currently allows for best utilization of the buses, which is a 3-tier system. And just for the conversation, a run is a segment of a route. So a bus run would be the bus goes, picks up a group of students, take the students to the school, departs the school empty, starts another run, and then does 2 or 3 of those in the morning. So what we wanted to look at was, on the individual runs for some of the schools, where they start and end and how we could pair them and tier them. So it was a pairing and tiering exercise from start to end to get to the schools. And again, the focus is how much time is needed for the proposed bells that we were approached with, how much time is actually needed to get those buses from one school to the next school and on time, especially in the morning. Currently, some of your buses get to the schools in the afternoon, right on at the bell or a little after the bell, but what we wanted to try to do is to make sure that the buses were getting to the schools on or before the bell in this exercise. And then you can see here the current bell times that you have for the schools and then the proposed bell times here. And as you can see in this scenario, we actually were approached with a 7:45 start, and how much closer could we get that to 8 o'clock? And the closest that we felt comfortable with is a 7:50 start. And we can kind of go into those, what were the restraints and about those. Next slide, the scenario, adjust the high school, middle school start time, 7:50 start. Here are the arrival and departure times for the schools as well. So in order to do a 7:50 start for elementary schools, we would need to drop some of the buses off at 7:35. And to do that, it's a quick drop and go. We got to quickly turn around, get those buses out of the elementary schools and start the high school, because we only have about 40 to 43 minutes to turn that bus around, go pick up high school students, and then bring them into the school by 8:20. And our goal was to do 10 minutes before the school bell and all of these in this scenario. And so when you do that, some of the buses could actually drop off a little later to a 7:40 drop time, so that those buses are tiered with a high school that isn't as long as a bus that needs to drop at 7:35. Your high school buses are the longest routes out there because they're covering the entire district and they cover more distance. So compared to the elementary schools, they're shorter runs, and then the high schools are much longer runs. And then we could see here, as I mentioned before, 26 of the 40 elementary buses would need to drop by 7:35. In the morning, a minimum of 43 minutes between the AM bells is a comfortable minute, 40 to 43 minutes to pick up the students between the bells to get them to the schools. And in the afternoon, it's about 35 to 37 minutes because we don't have less time. We still have the same amount of bell time in the afternoon. It's just that in the afternoon, the bus is sitting and waiting to board students, so you lose time transporting students home. Because in the morning, you pick up, you drop, and then you go. There is no downtime, there's no sitting. The wheels are always moving. And then in the afternoon, the buses are actually sitting and waiting at a school to board students. They have to sit for just so many minutes, and I think we agreed about 8 minutes. 8 minutes before a bus can depart, wheels up time to take students home. So we have a shorter window to drop off students in the afternoon from a routing perspective. Okay? Here's a sample of of an AM schedule, and here I just wanted to share with you the pieces that make up the individual runs. You're looking at 40 bus routes. The first tier is the elementary schools. The middle tier, which is the longest tier, is the high school. And then the third tier in the morning is the 5th and 6th graders, the middle school students. So you can see that the most of them are going to be the high schools. And then the 5th and 6th grade third tier is the least amount of the runs that are out there. So you can see that it's a scheduling and challenge in the morning and in the afternoon. Okay. Summary, increases from 33 routes to 40. Buses need a minimum of 43 minutes in the AM bell, between AM bells, excuse me. Proposed model reflects buses dropping 10 minutes prior to school, like I had mentioned before. Buses can't go longer than 35 to 37 minutes of dropping off students in the afternoon, because once we drop off that last student at the top of the district, we've got another 15, 17 minutes to deadhead back to the high school to get high school students. So we only have 15, 20 minutes to drop students off before that bus has to turn around and deadhead back to the school with no students on it to get high school students. And the same for high school students getting dropped off in the afternoon to get to the middle school for a third bell in the afternoon. As I mentioned before, afternoon scheduling presents a different set of challenges for scheduling. And then some of the runs, if I just go back one, some of the runs will need to be split up into smaller pieces, smaller runs, so that they could tier better in the afternoon for the schools to hopefully get those buses back to the high school by 3, leave at 3:08, and then get to the middle school by 3:45 for another departure of 3:53. Let's talk about AM pickup times for elementary schools. From our analysis, our earliest identified pickup time would be 7 a.m. for East Elementary, West at 7:08, and South at 7:02. And I think, talking to some of the folks here, there was a budget of 41 buses. We came up with 40. So there's probably an opportunity that we could take an East bus that's picking up early, split it in half so that the pickup time isn't as early, and then get that pickup time closer to a 7:10, 7:11, or even a 7:12 pickup, potentially. I know that in transportation, we always look at, as routers, we look at how we can make the routes more efficiently, how we sequence the stops, where the bus is coming from, where does it need to go next. I'm not going to drive by 15 stops to go start the route backwards when I could pick up those 15 stops on the way to a school, which reflects an early pickup time. So when runs get moved from a third tier to a first tier, there needs to be a job that I'm sure that the transportation department has already done, is resequence those stops to make them more efficient from where they're coming, where that bus is coming and where it needs to go. Okay? And just a little bit on national research on some of the late start times. I know that you guys have been talking about this as board members for a while now. Questions? Questions from the board? Yes, ma'am. Yes.
I guess a lot of people have said, can't you get the start time for the elementary schools to 8 a.m.? So did you look at what it would take for us to do that? How many more buses or routes we would have to add?
Sure. So we didn't look at an 8 a.m. start. What we did look at is a 7:45, and if we kept the other school bells at the same time,
right?
How much could we push that back? One thing that we could look at is, and we didn't in this scenario, but what we could look at is pushing everything back 10 more minutes for everybody.
No. So mine would be compressing it.
Correct.
Because I don't think we want to. There are a lot of reasons we don't want to put the other schools later.
Sure. And when you compress it like that, it creates a bigger of an issue for the afternoon pickup times. So with a 7:50 start, the goal was to get the buses to the schools at 3 o'clock on time and 3:45 on time. If we push that back, then that means that potentially the high school buses would show up at 3:10, depart at 3:18, and then we're even later after 3:45, closer to 4 o'clock at the middle schools. So it just gets, it's the afternoon that we need to focus on first before we can figure out if we could push it later in the morning. So focus on the afternoon. What are the impacts? What are the complications there? And then work with the morning from there.
Deanna?
So I'm assuming you didn't look at this, but if you added more buses, so I'm sure because of budgetary reasons, you were kept to the 41 buses. If you were to add more buses, would that allow us to push the start time slightly later in the morning for the elementary? You know what I'm asking? Does more throughput give us a later start?
Sure, and the first thing that comes to mind is add more high school buses because they're the longest runs, cut those in half, make more of them so that the high school routes are just as short as the elementaries so that could be pushed back. So we may look at, you would potentially end up with a high school route running 40 students on it, but cutting it in half. You may end up with a bunch of high school routes with just 15, 20 high school students on the buses. And at that point, it's more of a, time is against you at that point because you just don't have enough time to drop off a full bus of students. So to answer your question, yes, you could add more buses, but you would have to add more buses at the high school, make them shorter, and then look at what the impact would be for the afternoon and in the morning. Some of those buses need to drop off at 7:35, like I'd mentioned, because they have to turn around and quickly do a high school route and get students to the high school by 8:20. So they would have to be shorter as well.
I mean, I would imagine that if you had more buses, those buses will get those kids home earlier. So I'm not really as concerned about the back end because we've kind of built in what we think is going to be sort of the latest time somebody's going to get home.
Sure.
As you've heard, our real concern is on the front end. And so, that's really what I'm, trying to get a handle on is if you add more buses, you're going to have more buses at the beginning.
Right.
So the first tier is the elementary school. You're going to have more buses starting off with fewer kids on each bus, I'm imagining.
Right.
So that's fewer stops, quicker to the school.
Yep.
Shorter bus route. They get picked up later and could possibly start school later.
Correct.
Okay, I just wanted to understand.
Brendan?
Yeah, just to follow up on that question, I imagine I'm just looking at the individual bus routes, and it just looks to me, in light of the middle tier being so long and so many of these routes being really long routes, that you probably have to add a lot more buses to be able to kind of shorten that tier. But is that the right way to think about it, or can you add just a few buses to shorten a few of those tiers and sort of be able to compress them because of the fact that we have 3 elementary schools?
Yeah, so what we would have to do is go through, to answer your question, I think we'd have to go through the high school routes, look at what their ride time is, what the length of the run is, figure out and I'm thinking how I would approach this. To answer your question, yes, it's not just a few, it's going to be quite a few.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what it looks like based on this. Just a couple other questions. Is it, just given the ridership in the third tier and the fact that they seem to be relatively shorter routes just because it's 2 grades, have we looked at all at maybe trying to compress just that third tier? Putting aside, and I realize we were kind of focused on the first tier, but it just looked to me, again, looking at that same chart of the individual buses, it seemed to me that we had a good amount of space between our middle tier and the third tier for a number of buses. So we don't have to necessarily answer that now, but it's just another thing to potentially look at.
There's like 16 buses there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and if we could get the 9:15 a little bit earlier, that also might be helpful. So I don't know if you looked at that, but
No, not on that third tier.
Yeah.
The focus was a lot on that first tier.
Okay, and then the last one, sorry to keep going, which is somewhat related, is do we really feel like we need 10 to 15 minutes of time at the elementary schools from drop-off to bell time? And I don't know if that's a question for you or you.
Well, the goal was to do this 10 minutes before the 7:45.
Yep.
7:40, excuse me. But after looking at the 7:40, I ran into a lot of conflicts because the high school routes needed to start.
I got it, okay. I think
Yeah.
you said that and I missed it.
That's okay.
All right, thanks.
Sherry?
Hi, so just a couple of questions. Before our analysis was, we had a scenario where the earliest pickup time was 7:06. Now this is showing 7, although I know you're saying you only use 40 routes. We could use 41 to split maybe an east route, but I'm just confused why this consulting scenario came back with actually an earlier start pickup time than
And-
what we had before.
Sure, and I didn't know that the earliest pickup time was 7:06. So what I know is I know how long each individual run is from the first pickup to the time that currently goes to the school. So we have that window. So we know how many routes are 35-minute routes, 40-minute routes, and so forth. So then from there, it was just a matter of shifting and flopping the runs to the appropriate tier and then figuring out what the earliest pickup time. So the software actually calculated the 7 o'clock. And that particular route, I don't remember if it was a 7:35 drop or a 7:40 drop. But to go back to what we have not done, which could be done next, is to take the individual runs at the schools and look to see if they can be rerouted more efficiently to reduce that early pickup time.
Because I think actually the pickup times are more important than the start time.
Gotcha.
Right?
Gotcha.
And just on that point of the pickup times, can you respond to the questions and concerns that were raised earlier about the civil twilight versus sunrise and how you factor that into consideration here, and maybe just address the concern that I know civil twilight is a scientific definition. How many days, are not clear enough where that actually is, light for pickup? If you can just
Sure.
address that question and concern.
That's actually the first time I've ever heard that brought up at a school board for
We're
consideration.
very advanced here.
We're slow in Colorado, must be. Just kidding. But that usually, we have never taken that into consideration as far as, we've got Jeffco schools, there are 4 bus terminals, and 3 of them are in the urban areas, and then they have a terminal, the west terminal, where it's up in the foothills. And they're concerned about, isn't the darkness, is my child going to be attacked by a bobcat in the dark? So those are the kinds of things that we hear out west. But really, to be honest, have not given not much consideration when it comes to the twilight and the darkness at the bus stop when we do this analysis.
Okay, but you obviously agree that's a very important consideration when you're looking at student safety, right?
Absolutely, yes. And student safety for sure is by all means the biggest priority for transportation. And there's a lot of students that do get picked up in the dark, but there's also a lot of technology that's coming out on school buses to help with that darkness. I hope I answered your question.
Okay. Thank you for all of your analysis. I know you've had a very short amount of time and a lot of data to look at, so
No problem.
thank you
Can I ask
for
a
this.
question?
Oh, sorry, I
Sorry.
didn't see. Yep, go ahead.
On the high school rate, do we know what we use for because I know most of or I'd say half the school doesn't even take the bus. So I'm just kind of curious, does that play into the size of these high school routes?
That's a great question. I don't know. I don't have the ridership on the bus routes that were provided to
So
us.
Because if you could
I can
compress the
share
routes.
What we did was use the current routes, I believe, right?
Correct,
So
yeah.
the assumption has to be, we don't know the new kindergartners, and we don't know who rolls off at the high school, but using our current data, we build out, and then we adjust based on how that comes in, because we don't know who our kindergartners are going to be. So when you build
But I'm
routes.
talking about
in
high
advance-
school.
Yeah. So we don't know who our juniors rolling into seniors who aren't going to ride. We don't know who they are yet for next year, right? So we build it on our current data this year. So these are the high school kids who we're currently transporting, to try to build it
Probably
out.
most, right, don't ride.
Yeah, actually, we're looking at the possibility, you're right, to.
I mean, can we opt them in? How about we say, like, you don't get a.
That's
you
what we
opt
do
in
with
to-
11th, 12th grade, we have them opt in.
Yeah.
We're looking at expanding that into 9th and 10th. Why not, right? So
Yeah, well,
might as
that's
well
the
let them
question.
opt in too, instead of having the assumption that they're going to need it and let them opt out. If they opt in, we can do it that way. And if they've got siblings, whatever. What happens, of course, at that age when they're not driving themselves, they'll often want the bus to stop just in case there's a day that they need to ride.
Yeah, but then they find a bus stop and, they're not,
I agree. Absolutely.
they're not kindergarten. They can
Yeah.
find a bus stop and make a bus stop.
Yeah, so we
Why
can,
not-
it's.
Why not
it's-
try to optimize this? The high school route's the problem. Why don't we try to optimize it?
Right, right. And we're required to provide transportation for every student who needs it.
Right,
And
I'm not
so
saying
we can
we
have
don't-
them
I don't-
opt in. It should follow that
Right.
spirit of the
I'm
law.
not saying say no. I'm just saying,
Right.
let's see what we can how we can tweak it.
Right, because we also have our 7th and 8th grade population on that same tier, and we know that the
Right.
ridership at the middle school, I think, tends to be the highest.
Sure.
And with our, the two
don't
grades
drive
there.
yet.
So if we can have some of the 9th and 10th graders not opt in, it can help us.
So is that, can we make that part of the plan?
We've talked about it, and I think that we are planning to do that for next year.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
So then that might change this scenario then.
Well, and I think that's an important point, just to highlight it, that, when we're building these routes, we're building with known data, what we have, and Rob's working through that, and, but, Roy, as we know, has been working with these numbers and these kids and the routes for years and years, and, Rob is the second person to come to me and say, man, these routes are really efficient, like, Roy, the times are working or whatever, so, you do grow into routes over time, so as we look at it, we've got to build a system that's going to work. But I believe, Robin, you can verify this. We talked also about a year into it, we might be able to find time. When we see sort of how it works and how it flows together, maybe there's an opportunity in the future. The thing again is we're never going to overpromise, right? So we have to be careful to make sure that whatever scenario we bring forward is a scenario that we're confident is going to work. But there is opportunity to continually refine this. Both with, when we have the real numbers, when we know what our kindergarten numbers are. As we know, we had a very large 310 or so kindergarten class this year. If next year's kindergarten class follows projections, it might be 50 students less. What does that mean, in the routing as we look at it? So it's those kinds of things that, we put out the times, but we also say you've got to give us a plus-minus factor a little bit, because until we actually get each child on a bus and in a bus stop, we don't know exactly, where it's going to be. So it's an important point. Thank you.
And on that, well, just to add to that, in terms of other things to do, have we looked at what the impact of the mid-size buses would be, or could we? And I don't know if you have experience with that as well. I know now we use either the small buses or the really big ones, but I guess we have an option to potentially use the mid-size buses.
Yeah, so whatever the routes were, the runs were provided to us, that's what we did for the analysis. So yeah, there could be more efficiencies done outside of the tiering and the pairing exercise.
Okay. Deanna?
So I appreciate the opt-in, opt-out conversation. Just with 2 points, though. I think people don't willingly give up a benefit that they're entitled to. And I was one of those junior parents. I had a junior and a senior. I only had one car for them, and they didn't have the same schedule. So my junior was opted in because I needed him to take the bus on the days his sister couldn't bring him to school. And I think there are probably many families in that situation in this community. I also worry about an opt-in being expanded too broadly, because I think you could create chaos when a parent forgets to opt in, and then you get into the school year and it's like, well, wait a second, I didn't know I had to opt in. I think you have to be very careful about the opt-in, especially with the younger grades, because parents are focused on a lot of different things, and you would not want to create routes for the beginning of a school year and then create chaos because they're entitled to that route. And I don't know that anybody's going to be running to another bus stop if they by me, those bus stops are very far apart.
Listen, I live out in Valley Road. I know how long those stops are, believe me. But I see the kids out there. They can move.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Jerry?
Can I ask a question on the same topic?
To Brian?
Dr. Leslie then? So Sorry, so I do have one question. As we continue to analyze and move forward with this current scenario of having the elementary and the first tier, I'm wondering if we can look at, if it's possible to make accommodations for younger grades, similar to what we did when we transitioned from half to full-day kindergarten. We made accommodations like in a transition year or for the first several years where, you know, for example, if school start is 7:50, the first 10 minutes for grades K through 12 is considered a free choice period, and parents who opt to drive can drop for an 8 o'clock start without missing any learning time. So I'm just wondering if there's any scenarios like that that we can or should consider to help with the transition of such a plan. It will be a big change for many families. Just a question.
Well, and I'll give a non-committal response, but say that it's certainly something we could look at. And you're right, the option when we went to full-day kindergarten, it was if families felt that they wanted their children to come home at the half day, which was what had happened before, they were able to do that. I don't believe many availed themselves of that opportunity because they saw that it was the right move, right? It was the right thing for our kids and our classrooms and what have you. Our elementary principals are here, and I'd be glad to get together with Dr. Krenti and some others and talk about things such as that, not that yay or nay, but are there things we can do to provide for that transition to help to make that work. I'm confident in saying that our principals and others have already started thinking about that a bit, to think about what would the morning look like. Right now at 9:05 at our East and West, I know the morning looks like it has one structure, and I imagine it would change. I think even in South it might change a bit, whether the morning meeting becomes an afternoon conference is something else, I don't know, but I know they're thinking and talking about it. So I'd be glad to talk to them about it and get you some more information.
Okay, great. I just think that the more as we continue to move forward and analyze and communicate the changing schedule, the more that we articulate that we understand that this is a big change and these are the types of things, accommodations we're looking at, I think would be very helpful for the community.
Absolutely. And just to share briefly that we have been meeting and talking with others. I met with Bill, the executive director of the New Canaan Nature Center, and we talked about the possibility of developing an after-school program at the Nature Center for students that could run 5 days a week or be, as many days as somebody would want. That could be a longer type activity and experience for students that might include some exercise at 2:45 for a period of time, then some nature programming around STEM and using the resources of the center, and then it could end in some homework time, and students at the high school might be able to loop over there to provide some tutoring and do some work like that. So people are thinking creatively about opportunities and ways to sort of work through the transition to provide the services for families that they need, as the board has talked about. And that's why, in large part, why we've had folks like that engaged in the conversation for a couple of years, because they have been thinking about how can their services sort of fill a need for the community. And that's just one example. I know, again, Bill Kapp at Parker Rec and Craig at the Y, others are all thinking about different ways this could come together, as are our youth sports programs and others. So people are thinking about it, and while change is hard, I think they're also finding opportunity exists when they look at it and see what they can do.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Moving on, back to you with the budget update.
Okay, so, oh yeah, there's that. So last week, the Board of Finance voted to accept the Board of Education's budget to move forward for the next step in our process. There were some changes. They asked the Board of Education to change the funding ratio for the healthcare corridor. And after conversation with the Resources Committee, and you're welcome to add in if you like, but a conversation with the Resources Committee felt comfortable that using the existing agreement with the town, which has mechanisms for funding and triggers, essentially, that work through for funding of the healthcare insurance corridor. As long as that agreement itself stayed in place, we could flip the ratio of 60%, 40%, where the Board of Education was holding in the Internal Services Fund 60% of the corridor, and the town is holding 40% in an allocated reserve. That we could flip that, and the Board of Education would hold 40% of the corridor, and the town would hold 60%, as long as it was specifically allocated from the general fund for that purpose. We had that conversation at length with the Board of Finance for Selectmen, and folks felt comfortable that we could go ahead and do that. Again, as long as that agreement stays in place, which is very specific, took a few years to put together, that really does provide the protection for the board that has long been the top priority in having being a self-insured plan with an internal services fund. So so with that, there's a shift in the budget of about $518,000. That our request is reduced because we no longer need to fund the 60%. That's the change to the 20%. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I believe that's about right. So that's one change in the Board of Education's budget that was approved by the Board of Finance. The other, they had asked us for a total of $1.3 million, with looking at around $800 from the Internal Services Fund and about $500 from the operating. That was all that I was and we were comfortable putting forward with the Board of Finance that night around the insurance part, because really we're having positive experience in our healthcare fund. And what we just talked about in the beginning of the meeting is all about an epidemic going on and other things that may lead to additional healthcare needs. So I think it would be a little bit tone deaf to reduce our anticipated needs in the healthcare right now, and let's let this play out a little bit and see if our experience continues where it is, and then we can make some decisions as we get further down the line. So we're going to leave the rest alone. Board of Finance was comfortable with that. The other, the $500,000 out of the operating, we talked to them about our trends around retirement turnover savings, and it does tend to be about $300,000. That can kind of squeeze us a bit tight, but that's been about the average. So of the request, we agreed that we could add $175,000 to our turnover savings, which would bring that number up to $300,000, so in line with our historical. And then we have some other shifts going on that would net about $50,000. So we're able to reduce the request by that $225,000, but not comfortable going any further than that. Again, because the budget that we've been working on since October, refined through November, December, presented to the Board of Ed and continue to look at, truly has been very, very carefully considered and worked through, as you know. And, we don't build budgets with an anticipation that we're going to be reduced. We build budgets knowing that, and confidently saying the numbers we're putting in front of the Board of Education and the Board of Finance and Council are what we need to run the operation the next year. So Board of Finance engaged in lots of Q&A back and forth about all of this. All the questions are available on their website, and you certainly, they're there for anyone to see. And so right now we wait till next week. We go before the town council and continue our conversations. Anyone's welcome to add whatever they like.
Do you have any?
That was proactive.
I'm just getting ready.
That was
Okay, I just,
Because I usually don't have this on.
Yeah.
just a couple comments on the internal services fund, the corridor. I had a chance to go through the agreement with the town, and it basically says, if we need the money to fund our healthcare expenses, that they have to, fund that without delay, is what it says. So I got, I was, being on the resources committee, comfortable with that approach, just given that language. Mm-hmm. And then secondly, I thought, you all did an excellent, outstanding job presenting to the Board of Finance and working through things with them, and working with them to get them to understand what is a pretty complex internal services fund, accounting, but ultimately, every year we're budgeting appropriately and to our policy. And I thought it was the right thing to do to keep our policy the same, which is, a moderate policy. We're moving from conservative to moderate this year, but not go beyond that, and go to an aggressive policy, definitely in light of the circumstances with coronavirus. And I think it's great that we're at I think overall it's about 0.6% year over year increase, which is obviously a pretty conservative number. So, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? I would just echo Brendan's comments as well, and I know there was a lot of time spent answering a lot of really good questions about our budget from the Board of Finance and Town Council, and I know many members of the Board of Finance have shown appreciation and been grateful for all the time spent, so thank you. So, on to the next step.
That's right.
Okay. Statement of accounts, Dr. Keating.
Sure. So good evening. Tonight you have before you the mid-year transfers for our budget, and they're basically aligned with, or they are aligned with the reforecast in the 2021 budget book. So you have had a chance to review the differences as we've gone through the 2021 process, but I'm going to highlight some of the reasons for the transfers that you've seen. So first of all, we're about halfway through the year. We've spent 50.8% of our budget. We have encumbered 42.7%, and we have 6.5% remaining in the budget. When you look at the transfers, they represent about 0.5% of our total budget. So they're just below $500,000. And if you take a look at the current period transfers going down, you're going to see that we're forecasting some, modest spending on all accounts except for one, which is the purchase services, and that relates primarily to our outplaced students. So we'll get to that. With regards to salaries, we're going to be under by $164,877 for this forecast period. $237,000 of that number was the result of two things. We had a large number of LOAs this year that generated some excess that we had in the account. And then we also had several management positions that vacated, that we had a gap in time between the termination and the hires. So that was unusual for this year. We're usually around 100,000, and this year we had a little bit more than, double that amount of money. Where we needed money, we have special education drivers. We needed additional funds for one driver there based on needs for the department or for the children. And in the overtime account, we've added $15,754 for custodians, and campus monitors, $7,463. I would mention on the custodians, we went from a high a few years ago of $410,000 to $265 last year. And it's taken a lot of work in management. We've used our NovaTime time clock system to really help with that. And Dan Clark has worked very hard with the staff to accomplish that. We budgeted for $250 this year. I think it was a little over aggressive. And so that's why we bumped it up to the actuals for last year. But I still think it's been fairly good performance over the last few years on Dan's part. And then finally, we upped the athletic stipends based on the number of coaches that we do plan to hire in their respective lanes that they're coming in at. With regards to employee benefits, again, this year we're very close to budget. We're $46,571 below budget, which is 0.3% of this account. And the primary reason is related to the payroll taxes, and that's a direct function of our salary account. And we will be spending less there, so the taxes will be less. And for the second year in a row, we're seeing a reduction in our workers' comp premiums, and that's a function of our experience and the rate stabilization that the First Selectman has been able to negotiate with KERMA. So we've benefited from that, and the formula that we use to allocate. With regards to contracted services, there's several accounts within here. I'm not going to read through every single one. But outsourced services is the primary reason why we have savings in this account. We have $127,847 that was reclassified from outsourced services for special education into the outplacement account. So when you take a look at the outplacement account, you're going to see a number of around 400 and change of an increase. 127 of that is a reclass out of this account. And it's the way the state is now looking at the services provided by the facility. So we had been breaking them down, so it was tuition going to outplacement, and then let's say related services going here. We combine them now so that the state has the full picture of services for a student. And then you can read one of the other bigger areas that we've needed funding in this year is legal services, and we've put $45,000 into that account. And it's related to the needs that we've had in the district pretty much during this past summer and through the fall. With regards to property services, For the first time since I've been here, we actually have a decrease forecasted in this account, which again, I think speaks a lot to the work that we've done, really doing preventative maintenance in the schools and bringing in the staff that we have to help with that work. We've reallocated money also from repairs to special projects. Many of these projects have been completed. There are a few that we're holding back on based on, towards the end of the year, we'll release the money if we have it. But we've had some needs over at West. Half of the $62,000 is related to flooring replacement requirements over at West School. Moving down to purchase services, as I mentioned, the outplaced student account required $470,000, at least at forecast time. And I just would add that it can go either up or down. We've had a student recently, I believe, leave the district. So it's not always going up. We did have one student exit the program, but it can change. And if it does, and if we can't fund it through our operating budget, we'll go to the excess costs like we did last year. We try to avoid that as best we can, but if we can't, that's what we'll have to do. And we should be getting approximately $1 million in that reimbursable grant, which is a current year grant based on current year expenditures. And then our other accounts, the supply equipment and others, net difference is $4,277, which is a very insignificant change. And we do have extra revenue coming in. You're going to see about $63,000. A chunk of that has to do with the preschool program, and then another chunk of it has to do with our gate receipts. If anybody has any question on that, we also have within this statement this month, starting on page 8, all of our other funds. So if you take a look at page 8, you'll see that the grants are recorded there. And I just wanted to note for you, you see a negative revenue to expenditure. That's not uncommon. It's a most of our grants are reimbursable. So we literally spend the money, and at the end of the month, we ask the state of Connecticut for reimbursement. At the end of the year, we're trued up on all of our grants. So don't be alarmed by that. And if you move to page 10, you're going to see that under the 2020 actuals, we're currently running a very respectable revenue to expenditure. When you look at the 19 actuals to the 20, the 19 is the full year. The year 20 is the year up through January. So if you look down, you're going to see a negative, but that's just really a timing thing that has to do with where we are in the fiscal year. But we continue to do very well in this account, and we are going to be putting $200,000 of that fund balance into the internal services fund. And then finally, if you move over to page 12, you're going to see the facilities rental, donations, and summer school. And you'll note that it looks like there's a loss underneath rentals. We have outstanding receivables that are not recorded as revenues yet. We true that up at the end of the year. And it's not unusual at this time of year because we have basketball in the buildings. So it usually comes in a little bit later. Overall, I think we're doing very well.
Great, thank you. Any questions? Okay.
Yeah.
We need.
I just have one question on the facilities rental. Is this, so the right way to look at this is for net income, we're basically break even, right? $25,000 loss for facilities rental, donations, $6,400 net income, and then summer schools, $34,000 positive?
Yeah, in the rental account, we usually pick up, $5,000 to $10,000 a year, depending on who uses the facilities. But it's never a negative. We cover our costs, and then we have something on top of that.
Okay. So this is just more timing because we have.
It's a timing thing.
Yeah.
They didn't accrue the accounts receivable.
Right. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So we need
Oh, yeah. Okay.
we need a motion to accept the transfers as detailed in the statement of accounts.
I just have a process question. We typically have this brought before the Resources Committee before we vote, and this wasn't brought to the Resources Committee meeting prior to a vote, so we just got this tonight. So I don't think it's appropriate to vote on it tonight until we've had a real chance to kind of review and discuss, because that's sort of the procedure we always use.
It is, and that's perfectly fine. We leave it up to the board. Our thinking in bringing it forward, because we had processed that also, was that everything that's here is in the reforecast of the budget. So every transfer we're looking at here is what was presented in the budget back in January. So while we haven't, the narrative wasn't there, but if you look at the budget document itself, each of these accounts after the transfers will true it up to be what was presented in the budget as the reforecast. Because, as we reforecast the budget each year. So we asked the same question, said, well, the board has seen these changes because it is in the budget document. And we talked about it when I shared the budget, we talked about the reforecast of the different things. But if you'd like it to go and have the conversation there first, and then come back to the board for approval, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
But I just want you to know that
Yeah,
that was
no, I appreciate
the
it, but
thinking, so, yeah.
No, I appreciate it, but,
And
yeah.
we don't have any time pressure associated with it, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
so,
it's fine.
yeah, we can do it at the next meeting.
Yeah, our next meeting's coming up, so.
Good.
Okay. Action items, donations from the East School PTC.
Yes, so the East School PTC has generously offered to provide for a large shade structure in East's main playground. We have one over at South after we had the playground fixed and redone there. East PTC would like to do the same. It's a large structure. It's checked, they look for wind and everything else, rain, all the elements, all of that. They've done all of their homework and all of their research. And the total cost is $14,904. And I think it's a wonderful idea, wonderful addition, something our kids absolutely need, and another example of just how generous our community is.
It's wonderful. Motion to approve? Penny, second. Brendan, all in favor? Okay,
Great, thank you.
thank you. Comments from the public?
Not about buses. On the COVID piece that's going on, and again, I applaud you. My understanding, again, could be rumors, that staff like TAs are not paid, and you have a lot of dual working families in town. So if we do shut down for 10 or 14 days, I am sure they will all be, me included, looking for help with our students at home as we try to juggle work and keeping up with their schoolwork. I don't know if there's something through the PTC or through the website of those that are looking to help tutor. I don't know if that's even allowed that you can do, but they will experience a loss of revenue to their own families that will be unexpected and difficult for them. There's several families in town that will be looking for help with their children to maintain the continuity of all this amazing work that the teachers have put together as we try to balance it all and juggle all the balls in there. So I don't know if there's something centralized, again, through PTCs or the local schools, if there's resources available, especially of those that will not be covered during this time that could be available just to help get through, just in case, because I know we'll all be scrambling to try to make it as undisruptive as possible. So just thought I'd ask. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. We can't respond here, but we'll certainly take it as a suggestion, and yeah, thank you. Yep, absolutely, thank you. Okay, announcements and future business?
Oh, James?
Oh, I'm sorry. Moving ahead.
I just had a quick question, and that's, in this study, was scenario B priced out as well? And if not, I guess why wouldn't you just price it out, just in case? I mean, if it comes at a cost that's kind of similar and there's more community demand for that, then why wouldn't you just price that one out? And if I'm reading this correctly, and I think I am, the earliest start time moved up 6 minutes? The earliest pickup time? Is that right? Oh, you can't answer, sorry.
Stick around.
Okay, I'll stick around and ask then. All right, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Good evening. You probably don't hear thank you enough, so I just want to say thank you to all of you for your diligent efforts in preparing our community for CV19. There is no doubt that this school board and this town cares deeply for our students. So thank you, Dr. Lutzy, for your leadership and for your efforts in keeping us all healthy. I also want to thank you all for your efforts and your research on the various scenarios to get our schools to a healthy start time so that we comply with the medical guidelines. It's an important initiative, and your efforts are deeply appreciated. So thank you, and stay healthy.
Thank you. Okay. Announcements and future business.
Well, check your emails. Now, we will endeavor to continue to communicate clearly and effectively and swiftly. You know, as we know, when there's a quick breaking, rapidly evolving situation like this. But do know that the Connecticut Department of Public Health webpage has information. The links there right to the CDC has information. We are following the guidelines. There was a question that was asked about our cleaning products, and I want to assure everyone the cleaning products we're using kill viruses and are appropriate for that. The state made some decisions around what that we could and couldn't use, and what we're using now kills it. So we're adjusting and adapting and moving, trying and keeping up, and we'll continue our communications regularly. I mentioned the town council meeting, that again is next week for our initial conversation with the town council about our budget, and we'll continue doing that work. I do want to very briefly thank the community members that came to our public hearing and the board members that were there and spoke as well. The public hearing at the Board of Finance around the budget. I thought that it was a very positive message and communication that was shared, and it was really powerful for those of us there that listening. So thank you for the time, effort, and work that went into organizing your thoughts and sharing it, certainly in support of our school district. So we've got a meeting in a couple of weeks, and many decisions to make between now and then, and we'll be sharing those with you along the way. That's that.
Thank you very much. Motion to adjourn? Sherry, second? Jen? All in favor? Thank you.
Great, thank you.